Okay, yeah, that was probably herky-jerky there for a second. Again, inconsistent internet, I swear. Guess it just depends on the day, the weather, and the fact that University of Southern Mississippi has a really terrible internet infrastructure. Cannot begin to just discredit this thing they call a network as much as I can when I can. Of course, it doesn't really help to complain because they're on a budget shortfall this year and probably couldn't give less of a shit about network infrastructure. Probably more worried about, you know, student retention and figuring out how they're going to make all this money back. Anyway, on that note, I was talking about the dead zone on the hitbox on the knees of Necromorphs. Now, you'll notice more often than not, more than likely, while you're watching me play this, if God forbid you have the patience to stick around with all these momentary interruptions and hiccups. You'll notice that I'm going to name primarily for the knee, usually right around where the joint is, you know, bending on the leg. Reason being is that usually guarantees a cut-off limb. However, even that tends to be inconsistent with, in many respects, knees being very hard to sort of identify on Necromorphs, mostly due to the skin textures on them. They're kind of funky. It's kind of hard to really pinpoint where exactly to shoot sometimes to get a clean shot. Don't even get me started on arms, by the way. That tends to be, I'm assuming, shoulder. It's kind of hard. Sometimes it's shoulder. Sometimes it's at the bend of the arm itself. Heads are pretty self-explanatory. You shoot the head, it usually flies off. Which, according to the game, typically is supposed to piss the Necromorphs off and they make them more aggressive, but I've not really seen any actual evidence of that. Possibly on harder difficulties, I don't know for sure though. Not really a detail I would necessarily look for. It'd be appreciated, yes, but I mean, I don't really see that being a thing. I think that would be something you could claim, but it would probably be more of a placebo effect, not actually something that was technically designed in the game. So let's go ahead and let's finish this puzzle out real quick. We're gonna hit that. Slow down the arm. We're going to very clumsily run this way. We're going to hit this button. Weird. There we go. Okay, that's better. Not really sure what was keeping me from doing that. It's kind of, again, you're going to notice that a lot too. There is a bit of an inconsistency in terms of interaction, item interaction, or
Isaac, you did it.
Or terminal interaction. The game has a very odd way of handling that. So it may end up looking like I'm being very clumsy and not hitting the button right, or not hitting the right button, or what have you. There's that dead zone problem. Dead zone problem on the joystick this time though, not necessarily the joints. Thankfully, the game is very liberal with ammo, I've noticed, for whatever reason. And I feel like this game is actually, and let me go ahead and talk about that for a second, because there are some who would go as far as to actually refer to this game genre-wise as a survival horror. And while I could technically see that being argued for, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you, no, you're absolutely wrong in saying that. I would hesitate to call it that, and my main concern in that realm, my main reason for even assuming that, or having that assumption, is due to ammo drop. I don't know if it's like this on any harder difficulties, but I get the impression it is. Because I really don't see this game working very well without it. And it's sort of a reality of just the enemy encounter design. But the game itself, when it throws a bunch of enemies at you, which it will throw them at you regularly, admittedly, there's downtime, yes, in the game, but not as much as you would think, for something that was being plugged as a survival horror at the time of its release. The enemies as you kill them, and you're going to see me kill quite a few things in this game. Not a lot of options for mercy or you know, pacifism in this one. No complaints there though. That's inherent in the design. I mean, they are monsters after all. The the enemies themselves, when it comes right down to it, after killing them, after eliminating them, you're going to see quite a few of them dropping major amounts of ammo, usually in the realm of 6 to 8 rounds for whatever weapon you happen to be using. I believe it does prioritize based on what you have currently equipped. At the same time, too, it gives you plenty of ammo for your plasma cutter, which also kind of really pushes my idea that the developers really kind of like saw the plasma cutter as the main weapon. I would not be shocked that A, this was probably one of the first weapons conceptualized for the game, and B, probably at an early state in development, this was primarily considered the main weapon in the game. So you'll see quite a bit of ammo drop, so there's never really a point where you're, quote, doing the whole surviving thing very often. Survival in terms of not getting eaten, I guess that's one way to look at it, but in terms of like item management, resource management, there really isn't a whole lot of it. As a matter of fact, I know in the 3 hours I've played of the game so far, all the way up until Chapter 5, I found myself more often than not at odds with the inventory system in the sense that I was constantly having to drop items and constantly having to sell things based solely on the fact that I would find so much ammo that I would have a surplus. As a matter of fact, the game, oddly enough, and it is very telling, I think. Ooh, here's an excitingly creepy hint of what's to come. That's definitely not the same type of enemy we've been encountering so far. This one's definitely crawling, doesn't seem to have legs, and definitely has a tail. Very interesting. We'll get to the enemy design here in a bit, I believe, because there is some good and there's some bad to discuss about that. But as far as the inventory management, again, I found myself more often than not having way too much stuff to grab and not enough space to really work with it, quite in contrast to something like, say, Resident Evil 4, which, while also liberal with ammo and health pickups in many respects, does pepper throughout the game several areas where you're just not going to pick up a lot of stuff, where there's just not going to be a lot of resources to utilize. So at that point, you start feeling a little less confident about using them. You try to parcel them out a bit better. This game really, just in the amount of medkits it throws at you, I never really have felt like, oh goodness, I'm in a dangerous situation. It's always more like, well, let me just quickly pull up the context menu, etc. Excuse me. As a matter of fact, I think that's half the reason why your inventory menu is not, in fact, a separate menu. It is instead just a pop-up screen. You still have full control over Isaac. He can still take damage. He can still be killed while using that menu. So there is a little bit of immediacy to it, but not much. Also true in terms of the save feature in the game, which we're going to go ahead and start a new file on the game. Save feature, very snappy, very quick, always nice, always appreciated. However, it's not appreciated as to how many you're going to in fact encounter throughout the game. It seems like every 3 to 5 rooms, you'll see one. Generally speaking, they're telegraphed pretty easily too. If it's a big room, if it's the music changes suddenly, if you think, God forbid, you might have an enemy encounter in a large fashion. When I say that, I mean more in terms of like you might fight more than 6 enemies in this one room. Yeah, you'll have a save spot. Kind of odd. I'm not a big fan of that per se. I don't necessarily hate the fact that there's multiple save spots, mind you. That's certainly not something I hate or am upset about. It's just the fact is that it just seems like for a game that's supposed to be about being an engineer who's armed basically with a laser cutting tool that doesn't do its job very well, you would think that like maybe we could create tension since the gameplay itself isn't doing a very good job of it from just a strictly shooting perspective. I would think maybe the designers would have been maybe a bit wiser in not giving me so many save spots. Especially when you combine it with the backtracking, of which there is plenty in this game. If I'm not mistaken, the second chapter alone is probably the most egregious example of backtracking I've seen so far. It is absolutely wild. And they make no bones about it either. I will give them that. They are as confident as it gets when it comes to the backtracking. They try their best to basically try to integrate it into, well, you need to get this, but first you're going to have to go here, then you're going to have to go here. Why? Because we say so. Not very well done in that sense. Could very well have been handled better. Again, like say going back to and I hate to keep bringing it up, but really, the game, it takes so much from it, you can't help but bring it up. Resident Evil 4 does a really good job of backtracking. There is backtracking in RE4. There is no doubt about that. Between the opening chapter, which you literally walk in one large circle, and then the castle chapter, which is just full of backtracking. I mean, you are constantly going through new area, then back to main area, then to new area again, back to main area, etc. There's our new enemy. Right on. So, yeah. So the backtracking in this game is really not handled very well. Usually, backtracking, if it occurs in a video game, I don't necessarily mind it from a mechanical perspective. It's kind of sometimes necessary. You really sometimes just don't have a choice, unless you really just want to like move us from one next thing to the next, which can sometimes be very jarring. So I understand backtracking has its place, but it can be handled in a way that is, I guess, interesting. You can make me walk around in a circle, but if that circle is very interesting from just a environmental and gameplay perspective, I won't mind it at all, really. I probably won't even notice it until, upon retrospect, think, wow, I walked in a circle. That was kind of neat. Now, to talk about this enemy type, well, we just got introduced to this guy. Kind of a newish thing. No legs. He's a crawling, weird, behemoth-esque thing with a large tail. Uses the tail to stab you, things like that. This is basically the kind of enemy type you'll see in this game. Generally speaking, that's probably one of the most disappointing aspects of the enemy design. Really, they're actually pretty neat for all intents and purposes. I mean, they've got the removable detachable limbs. They're very fast. They're agile. They're not really affected by gravity per se. We'll get to that later, I believe, in Chapter 3. They're really neat, but the thing is, though, there's just not a whole lot of differences between them. You've got the standard common, two-legged, run-at-you, tries to kill you thing. You've got the crawling monster. You've got the respawning monster. You've got the large heavy. And that's basically it. That's up to 5 chapters. As a matter of fact, it says Chapter 5. I think I'm actually going into Chapter 6 in that save file, but 5.5, well, just say 5.5 chapters worth of game in a game that lasts only for 12 chapters, and we've only seen 4 enemy types, and they don't seem... Oh, 5. There are 5 enemy types. I keep forgetting. There's one more, the aborted fetus thing. We'll talk about that when we get to it, too, because from a design perspective, it's by far probably one of the most interesting of the bunch, and not necessarily just for the reason that it's... that it's very much implying, violence towards children, which this game does a very interesting job of. Not to say I'm a freak for violence against children, but it's kind of a no-no in many, many, many forms of media. So it's actually almost refreshing to see a game not be too worried about it, as it were. Now, let's see. Well, I don't even remember what we're doing. That's kind of the biggest problem with Dead Space, I think. I hope the sequel does something to alleviate that. But even with the constant reminders from 2 main cast members who are trying to support me, plus the, go here button, plus the go pick this item up, it's very important button. Very effective use of lighting and shadow there. Very good, Dead Space. Between all of that, technically, I still am not entirely sure what I'm doing. I know I was supposed to, repair a tram system, and that's supposed to take us somewhere. And I've actually already played through this, too, and I have very little recountenance of actually what I'm supposed to be doing, or what my objective is, or if there's a primary thing going on. It's kind of disappointing in that sense. It really could have afforded maybe something a little better than a fetch mission, which
it's Kendra.
Which is what a lot of this game boils down to.
There should be a key somewhere in the
Here we are yet again, another... First it was a circuit board, now we have to pick up a special key. Especially for a survival horror, something that was being purported as survival horror anyway. not really buying it when the first hour is basically immense amounts of fetch quests and please go get this, bring it back here, okay, now we need this, please bring that too. That's always disappointing. That's always, it just leaves a really shitty taste in my mouth. Especially when the game doesn't really even bother to try to hide it. It actually attempts to rationalize it based on, oh, the design of the ship, or oh, the nature of the fact you're an engineer. That was actually something I read. I read a couple of user reviews, or user impressions, excuse me, on the Steam forums page for Dead Space, where they talk about the fact that they actually like the aspect of Isaac Clarke as an engineer, and the majority of the game he's actually basically doing engineering work. You know, he's fixing stuff. He's repairing vehicles. He's repairing instruments on panels and such. I mean, yeah, I mean that, and that's cool, yeah. But like, the game doesn't offer a compelling way of doing that. It boils down to go to room A, pick up object B. Now go to room C, pick up object D. Now combine two into room E, and then go into room F. Like, that's basically the game in a nutshell. For a very large portion of what I've played so far, it's very, very, very centered around, you know, go pick this up, bring it back here, go pick this up, now bring it back here, combine these two items, but you're not actually combining anything because it just automatically does it for you. It doesn't even give you that option. And a lot of people will talk about Resident Evil 4 and they'll say, well, it's very much an action game, blah, 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 this. But between the inventory management and the fact that there are puzzles that require you in many respects to actually, you know, use cognizance of some form or fashion to say, well, actually, these two items look like they are supposed to be combined together. Let me go ahead and manually do that. Even something as simple as that, as mechanically bland as that, which essentially equates to opening two menus, hitting two buttons, and calling it a day. Even that's better than just funneling me down this room to that room to this room to that room, picking this up, picking that up, etc. Mind you, now it's going to make it sound like I hate this game, and I don't. I really do enjoy it. I think it's a really well-made game in many respects. It's just not in that way, not in that sense. Very, very... I'm going to go out on a limb here. I really probably shouldn't even make the delineation. It does imply a form of maybe stereotype or racist bindings, but this is very much a Western game development problem. We're seeing it crop up in Japanese game development here and there pretty often, more often than it used to be anyway. Very good example being Final Fantasy 13, which hopefully we'll be playing by the end of this week. I do have it pre-ordered, and I will be giving it a shot. But I find this game falls under a very specific category of Western game design philosophy that I've been seeing far more than I would really like to admit. And that's under the assumption that, you know, players, they may not want to explore. They may just want to be playing the game strictly for the story. Not really sure where anybody ever got that idea or why that idea permeates. And why that's even something that people actually do prefer. Oh, I just play the game for the story. Once I'm done with it, I trade it in at GameStop. That player exists. And I don't necessarily decry them. It's up to them. Whatever they feel they got out of their investment, if they feel like they got something out of it, fine, great. But I feel like that's kind of missing the point. If we're running a funnel us to the next cutscene or next piece of dialogue or next narrative program, I just, that's not very good. And this game, while it has a lot of good stuff in between that, it does boil down to that more often than not, of developers not really trusting the idea that the player would maybe even want to explore some of these vastly detailed and extremely well put together environments. And instead, no, they're just going to hit the go here button. They're going to go follow that straight line until the next contextual clue is given to them. Objective completed. Okay, now go do this. Okay, so yeah, I feel that's a very Western-centric design thing. It's not even a question of linearity versus non-linearity. It's literally a question of, do we trust the player to have the... I'm not even going to say ability. Do we trust the player to have just the interest, just the curiosity to go over here and check out what this is? And I'm finding that a lot of developers lately kind of think that we don't. There's an argument that it's more about mass market appeal, but I don't believe that falls into the category of mass market appeal, because I just don't see a mass market being appealed by, oh hey, I don't actually have to do anything. It'll just tell me what to do and where to go and why to go. I find that's another real big issue of video games nowadays, is that every major AAA title seems to have to explain heavily to the player why it is they can only go in this direction. They have to come up with this extremely contrived, like, oh well, this is locked down, this is under quarantine, and this thing needs to be repaired. So we have to take care of each one in tandem, one after another, before you can progress to the next area, which is going to invariably have the same exact problem with 3 other different components. It's just It could be handled better, is what I'm saying. It doesn't necessarily have to be an open world environment, but I don't have to constantly be reminded that technically I can go anywhere I want, but you better go in this direction if you want to continue the narrative, of which there's very little. Again, this game is not exactly a font for amazing in-game narrative. It's pretty basic. So for there to be an argument, well, casual players, I hate that. I absolutely hate that term, by the way. Casual and hardcore gamers. I hate that nomenclature so fucking much. But as though it's supposed to be for, I guess the idea is that people who aren't used to playing video games, or who don't play video games at all, that would actually go into a store and purchase. At the time, I believe the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 were still going for excess of $300 to $350. I would go in and buy a $300 to $350 box, then put down $65 after sales tax for this game. And I've never played a video game before, but for some reason that box for Dead Space sure looked intriguing, so I figure I'll pick that up. And my main point in buying it was not actually to interact with the game, but was to passively engage with it in regards to the story, of which there's very little, but it has a sort of sci-fi undertone that reminds me sort of Alien, assuming I even understand that cultural reference as a probably not critical, digester of media. I mean, it's kind of bullshit if you ask me. It just seems like lazy design. A very, 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 very good excuse for lazy design. But lazy design nonetheless. Here, I've got to market this to 2-3 million people. So let's just make it as cookie cutter as possible. Another, I guess, effective use of jump scare, but if you didn't see it coming, I'm sorry, you probably should have. Which arguably, that's kind of the weird misgiving I have about this game to some degree. Why I can't necessarily recommend it entirely. I can't give it a 100% positive recommendation. I have to say that tastes will vary with Dead Space, especially in accordance with the design elements I was, relating before. What could have been a really interesting romp through a haunted house in space, cliched as it may have been, it would have been a lot cooler and a lot smoother to sort of just give me a large environment to explore that is locked off, walled off to some degree, until I start getting more items, more inventory, I get special keys. Basically, Resident Evil Mansion. And I don't mean like Resident Evil Modern, I mean like Resident Evil PlayStation 1995 Mansion. That, to me, would have made far more sense in this game. And yes, you would have had to have copious amounts of loading screens throughout each area to signify a new environment, this and that. Whatever. I will happily, myself personally, I will happily throw out seamlessness, or the what's the word? The mirage of seamlessness. There's nothing seamless about this game in many respects. There's plenty of load gates, trust me. When I come into contact with one, I will happily point it out. But I would have thrown that away quickly. Just from a design perspective, I would have said, you know what, fuck that. We don't need faux seamlessness. What we need is a large haunted house in space. Something scary, something oppressive, something to be explored, but carefully because we can't see very well and there's lots of shit running around. Something like that would have been a lot more interesting, I think. It would have gelled better with the general design aesthetic, or aesthetic design, as far as the... I must be slightly dyslexic. I keep catching myself doing that. I need to correct myself more on that. Aesthetic design, as far as just from a visual and oral environment, would have benefited greatly, I think. But instead, we're given the please go here button. Please go here. We have to go here. You gotta go here. You know. There's exploring to some degree, but not a lot of it, admittedly. And that's just a damn shame. Damn shame, really. But modern video games, that's the design. That's what sells, according to industry leaders like EA, like Activision Blizzard, like Ubisoft, like Take-Two. So anyway, moving on. I suppose we can change the subject. We've got a bench here. Game gives me less than half a second to talk about it before it lets me know quite literally what the bench is for. And it's for upgrading weaponry, suit technology, stasis stuff, health, etc. It's basically your overall, all-round. It's your upgrade station. And it's pretty simple in most respects. I mean, there's not a whole lot really going on in it. You got a couple of options here as to how to approach the actual design of it is pretty simple too. I mean, basically you have to connect the nodes. Once you've connected one of the actual upgrade nodes to the basic node, that's when you can add another power node later and then, upgrade it that way. It's a little bit kind of hokey in that sense. I find that a lot of times the game's not giving you enough power nodes really to work with. So when you think you're going to upgrade something considerably, instead you get this, where I can totally commit to that node, and then now I've got two options, but I've got to actually commit to that node to get it, so I guess I'm just going to go with air. Even though technically the game has given me literally no option, no environment, no nothing so far that allows me to even really take advantage of said upgraded air, but that's just the way I'm going to go. I find a lot of times in games like this, regardless of how survival horror-esque it may be, it's usually wiser to upgrade if the option is given to you. Health, armor, things like that, secondary stuff, even if it's not used that much. It can usually save you quite a bit of ass-kicking headache later on down the road, specifically in this game too, when we get to the proper use for the air meter.
Back to tram control and slot it into the computer array. That should get the tram system back online.
Oh my! First QTE moments. Alright, now you notice none of that was particularly scary. And reason being is that Isaac technically, he takes damage, yes, but he doesn't take quite as much damage as you would think. Not to mention the... Hell, let's face it, I know several Resident Evil titles, they were introducing one-hit KOs, one-hit kills fairly early in the game, and we're talking usually within the first hour. This game, while I believe there are one-hit kill monsters, there probably are anyways, there are definitely monsters that do considerably more damage than what we've experienced so far, but I mean, generally speaking, the monsters themselves just do not present much of a threat. Whether it's between the fact that I have currently 7 different canisters for just health, which heal me almost to max on just the minimum one. Whether it's that or the fact that the monsters themselves just really do not do that much damage so far. Never do I really feel like I'm under much duress or threat, and it's kind of unfortunate for a game like this. It's definitely a major criticism that you really cannot ignore. The argument would be, well, play it on hard, play it on the hardest difficulty. That'll be that should be where it would be. Yeah, true, but I mean, I would think on the medium difficulty, just a standard, hey, This is the standard by which the game was made. Everything we choose to do difficulty-wise, whether by lowering or raising it, we set the bar right here at medium, and medium just does not feel medium. It feels easy. And easy, from what I understand, feels like very easy. So again, difficulty curve could have been handled a little bit better. It's one of the few times I will actually, honestly argue that the difficulty curve should have been far greater. Is that there should have been a point where this idea of strategic limb removal, that there would have been a very big risk versus reward set up on that, rather than what we've got currently, which is basically, it's running at me, let me shoot it in the knee, pop it a couple of caps right there, okay, we're done. So here we go, we've got, I guess we're doing, again, we got a circuit board. We needed a key because we needed a piece of a circuit board, then we needed another piece of the circuit board. So now we've got the thing online. I think, do I hit A here? No. I hit A over here. I think, yeah. And here we go. Not really sure why that's not an automated process at this point. Seems as though it's just an excuse by the developers to give you something to do, to sort of keep you doing stuff. Again, kind of falls into the same category as the opening cinematic, where I, for some reason, can look around, but I can't technically interact with anything.
The quarantine just lifted.
But it seems as though the developers assume that's interaction in the basic sense, so that should count, but doesn't, not really, not in 2014, not in 2010 when this game was... Wait.
You're out of your league, Hammond.
I take that back. When was this game?
We're going to die up here.
I think this game was released. It was, yeah, 2009, 2010, if I'm not mistaken, when this game was released.
That's exactly what I am going to do, with or without you. You understand each other.
We do, but I feel that you're vaguely foreign, and I don't know why. Kind of screams of cheap voice actors. Well, they're not union, so we can totally pay whatever we want for them. I see that a lot actually with EA games. And it is specifically EA. I don't play enough Activision games to really, I guess, throw the blame in their way. Take-Two is typically really good about their voice, VA, when it comes to games that are developed under their publishing label. And Ubisoft actually is, for all the things I could say shitty about Ubisoft, I cannot technically say a lot about production in terms of like voice acting, writing, things like that. They actually do a pretty good job of it. But EA tends to be fairly problematic about this, whether it's the fact that Isaac Clarke is saying nothing right now, or the fact that he's got two very perky, very talkative compatriots, where one sounds like she was sent in, got her paycheck, kind of lazy, doesn't really sell the whole I'm fucking scared to death and I think I might be dead within the next 2 seconds considering all the things horrible on this fucking ship, run through the vents and I'm never quite safe. She never really sounds that upset. She does, she sounds like she's acting upset, but she never really sounds upset, which frankly kind of confuses the narrative because I don't know whether to trust her or not. Somebody might see that as a positive. I see that as just a confusion of message. And then, of course, you've got the vaguely foreign-sounding corporal, security dude, whatever. I don't even know his name. I don't, like, this is how... The doctor is a doctor of something, and then he's something. That's already not a good sign. But then you get, like, you get VAs, voice actors, actresses, who are... They're serviceable. I mean, like, they're doing what they're supposed to do. They sound correct. They don't sound necessarily out of place, but... They sound like they were kind of gotten out of central casting, like, i.e. very cheap, very not expensive at all. Again, stuff like that makes a big difference. I mean, that could have made a big difference from the get-go. I mean, if we're going to, surround the player with constant reminders, constant voiceover, constant, here, let me tell you where to go next, it would have been really nice to maybe have, like, I don't know, Troy Baker pop up. I mean, you probably would have had to change the fact that this... corporal guy he wouldn't be able to really be an African American anymore because Troy Baker I do not believe has the chops to pull off an African American character. But at the same time, and while you would argue, well, that's kind of silly, that would sort of be whitewashing, blah 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 blah, whitewashing in hindsight. Let's be fair, I don't really think it matters whether or not this particular guy is black, white, Asian, etc. I don't really. He's not memorable. He's not interesting. He's not. He's very B. Hell, let's be honest. He's more C grade movie. He barely registers as a blip on our collective radar. He's just there to send us an objective of where to go next. He does not serve any purpose outside of that. Anybody who argues differently is just beyond me at this point. I could not begin to understand how anybody could argue differently. The two main characters that you're consistently interacting with, rather communicating with, rather actually communicating at you, you're not really saying anything to them, as Isaac. They're just that. There's just not much to them. They're not saying much. They're just there. I don't really feel compelled to worry about them. I don't feel like, oh goodness, they have a family waiting for them back home. I don't think they have anything waiting for them outside of this particular contextual environment. They exist in this game only to serve you, the player, moving to the proper direction in which you need to go. And at the same time, I've got this. So really, even that seems superfluous at best. Because frankly, I wouldn't even need them to be telling me where to go. Again, it sounds like I hate this game. I don't. I actually like this game in many respects. But man, there's just some really bad decisions from a design perspective that really could probably have been taken care of better. I mean, if your compatriot characters are little more than HUD videos where they act scared and talk about where you need to go next, I can argue that you really didn't need them. That you could have made this a one-man mission for Isaac Clarke on a one-man mission to this space station, was damned absolutely certain that something was definitely going wrong here and wanted to go help his girlfriend, fiance, whatever. When he arrives on ship, finds out everything's gone to shit. Very much a classic sci-fi scenario, and it wouldn't have been quite as cliched, really. Because we would have had our one man on a mission mixed with everything's gone to shit on a space station meme, you know? And so already it's 100,000 times better because we're not constantly bombarded with bullshit, you know, okay, Isaac, please go here, or Isaac, I'm really scared, you need to go activate this tram real quick. And there we go, another example of the classic, oh goodness, I'm not that scared, let me walk 2 feet this way, you will be thoroughly ineffective. Or ineffective, excuse me. Goodness, all the malapropisms today. Now, so on that, let's kind of keep that train of thought here for just a second. So, obviously, we've already got a fix there. Isaac Clarke goes here by himself. We immediately establish isolationism. That is to say that our main character's literally by himself. He's here on a one-man mission to save his girlfriend slash fiance slash, you know, former lover, whatever she is, Nicole or something. Again, another throwaway character. But literally, probably a perfectly good example, I guess, of sort of that Anita Sarkeesian, you know, women versus tropes in video games kind of thing. I know doing a shout-out like that probably pisses some people off, but really, what is she other than just I guess a framing device? She really serves no other purpose. We get nothing from Isaac Clarke. He doesn't tell us anything. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have inner thoughts or inner monologues. He's just sort of like a space guy. And so we're told, you know, by, I guess, inference, oh, well, his girlfriend's on the Ishimura, and he's really concerned about her because that's why they're going there to begin with, is because she sent a distress signal, etc., yada, yada, yada. Okay, great. But, like, that's basically it. That's about the extent of the interaction you will have with this character who I think is called Nicole, but frankly wasn't made very memorable enough to begin with for me to even really be comfortable assigning her a name, because there's really nothing much to her. She's a MacGuffin, a framing device, something that compels our main character to be here. Without that, he wouldn't be here, I suppose. But that's not very good. There should be a few more gates beyond that. It shouldn't just be, well, he's only here because. Like, goodness, I could imagine there would have to be a better reason for that. Like, for instance, gets distress signal. Okay, he's really concerned. We have an opening cutscene of Isaac Clarke maybe having an inner monologue where we're kind of questioning his ability to stay sane and cope with this sort of situation, because we know from promotional material that this game is straight up horror. There's some horrible shit going on this station that his girlfriend happens to be stuck on. He's going there. He's nervous. He's worried. Very isolated. Nobody's coming with him. He's just a one-man renegade engineer, which already sounds more interesting than half of the fucking main character archetypes you'll see in modern games, at least from a Western perspective. Eastern perspective, it would be model on the run, really pretty-looking blue-haired guy. Basically Noctis circa Final Fantasy 15. I mean, that's ostensibly what you're looking at with that. Just to try and balance it, I guess. We're not necessarily exactly like Fox News, but we do try to do fair and balanced discussion here. Or rather, me just monologuing for a bit, and anybody else listening or watching can discuss it. But in reference to that, already we've got betterment. We don't have a bunch of pesky characters that we have to constantly, add up to. We don't have to explain away characters. We don't have to make them more interesting. We can just say, well, Isaac's already interesting because he's an engineer that's going out here by himself to take care of this problem. His girlfriend's already interesting because we have dialogue from Isaac maybe that's, kind of explaining why he'd want to help her. Maybe we could have a flashback sequence too. Maybe we could have flashback sequences to him and her interacting on the station, maybe her talking or doing things that sort of imply that she's an important figure on the station, that she's actually an important maybe scientist or health official or something of that nature. Maybe a sort of CDC in space. Again, though, we really want to kind of position that to where we're kind of explaining that in the sense that we're watching her do things as a character, not necessarily going strictly by Isaac's monologue musings, because again that kind of implies that oh no, woman's being crafted in the male image, etc. Also kind of an issue with video games. I don't necessarily think it's as big an issue as just the female as non-character. That's definitely a huge problem. You could argue male's kind of a non-character, but then again, by the very design of Isaac Clarke being a male and being the main thing you control, we kind of are sort of forced to identify with him immediately. So we're given a male form to identify with, not really much of a female form to deal with beyond the, oh well, she's in trouble, go help her. But yeah, I mean, you've got two solutions right there to that problem already. Well, not to say that this game is necessarily indicative of that problem. I mean, it is first and foremost sort of an action horror romp, so I'm not necessarily looking for amazing characterization and, God forbid, gender equality. But little things like that, just sort of like maybe giving a little more weight to Isaac's girlfriend / fiance, whose name eludes me at the moment, or giving a little more weight to Isaac's issue or his problem, the thing that's actually presenting itself as the issue for him. I mean, little narrative decisions like that. You don't have to give me 45 minutes of cutscenes to explain that. You can do it through environmental detail. You can do it through, inner monologue, little dialogues here and there between Isaac and himself, or him reminiscing about his fiancée, or, maybe cutscenes of Isaac sleeping, or kind of like not really like sticking with reality. He's kind of daydreaming maybe in this horrible environment just to sort of try to keep himself sane, and in doing so we learn a little bit more about the lady friend of his, what she's maybe doing, what her job is on the station. I mean, it's just stuff like that. That's not even nitpicky. That's just like, come on guys, write. You've got like 4 writers on this game. Why didn't any of them write anything? They just strictly wrote like event flags for the coders, it seems. Like, that's really not good. That's not good, and that's just something you see quite a bit of in games right now. Western, Eastern, doesn't really matter who made it. You'll see a lot of it though, where it's just like, well, we have writers. Well, what are they writing? Well, they're writing where you go next. Clearly, they're writing in-game dialogue, little side dialogue. Well, what's that consist of? Oh, hey, did you know that you can totally cut the limbs off of enemies in this game? That's not writing. That's again lazy development. So yeah, so apparently I don't even know where we're going now. I think we were going to go check on where are we going? Back towards where the ship is, I guess. Mainly due to the fact there were a couple of boxes we couldn't get during the opening cutscene because the game wouldn't let us. Also, you'll notice the melee attacks aren't exactly directional. What I mean by that is that it doesn't really matter where I'm aiming. Isaac's only going to punch that way and stomp that way. That is it. Kind of, it has its use, especially when you're running low on ammo, which admittedly does not happen very often in game. But yeah, melee attacks that don't really do a whole lot. Exciting stuff, really. And it's always an exciting idea, exciting attitude to have. Okay, so for some reason we're going back on the ship, though. I think we gotta like pick up something, or like a log, or we're loading a damage report or something. I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to do. Then this happens. we lose control of the game yet again. Again, kind of bad design decision. Game's not really giving me a reason to care as to why that even happened. Instead, it's just like, well, go this way. Okay, now you're on the ship. Okay, ship's exciting. Stuff's happening. Okay, now you gotta run. So you don't really have to run because we're actually just gonna funnel you right outside the ship where you're gonna have a small little arena fight with a couple of different monsters, you know, etc. Whatever. I don't know. Again, could have been designed better. A lot of this could have been designed better.
That was our ride home. It's the only way off the ship.
Not the end of the world anyway.
Hammond.
It's not awful. It's not.
Everything.
Just let me think.
It's not the worst game ever, mind you. It's not. It's actually a really good game in many
Can you
respects.
access command computer?
Strictly from like just gameplay design. Actually, playing the game is really fun.
It's no good.
But,
There's an executive lockdown of all primary
you know,
systems. Without the captain's authorization, I can't access
Progression
them.
design
Where's
is
the
just
captain?
horrendous. Now here we
There
go.
he is.
Where's the captain? He's actually here.
Captain
Guess where you're
Benjamin
going
Wright.
next.
Location, med lab. Status, deceased.
What?
Because I'm an engineer and I can't unlock doors technically, but
can't
I can,
access that
but I can totally
Find the
like,
captain and you'll find
you know,
his rig. With his
why do I need the
authorization,
rig
I can
though?
crack this computer
I'm an
with it.
engineer. I build this shit for a living, right?
I'm sending the tram back to
Even
your
better,
location.
I fix this shit for a living. So not only do I know how it's put together, I know how to fix it when it's not working right. But no, I've got to go the long route of getting on the tram, going to find a dead carcass, picking up a log, whatever that is. They're not really sure, not really explaining what that is. I'm assuming it's like a PDA. Pick that up, bring it back here, then unlock another door, which will lead me to yet another area. This is basically how each chapter goes, by the way. I don't know, like, that irritates the absolute piss out of me, because it's like, kind of like Bioshock. Bioshock, I think, if I'm not mistaken, had the same problem. Where, like, it funneled you, like, the first 3 or 4 areas you go to, like, their own little, like, self-confined, self-made thing. But then, like, you will technically go back to some places, and you technically have the option of going back to different places if you want to. So you can go explore older areas. Maybe you've gotten some plasmids or something that allow you to go into areas you weren't able to go to before. But like this game doesn't even allow you that. It's just like, no. Now we're only going to make you backtrack when we tell you need to backtrack. Just, yeah, again, not necessarily asking for a non-linear experience. I'm just asking for, I don't know, like, something better than that, maybe. You know, like something maybe a little more interactive, maybe something with a little more player urgency, where maybe I'm like, you know, oh yeah, that's right. Again, this is the kind of game that really probably would have benefited from one large centralized location, like a hub, if you will, with a bunch of smaller areas kind of interconnecting everything. Kind of like a Metroidvania, but kind of more like a Resident Evil game classic sense, like Resident Evil or Resident Evil 2. Thanks, I probably, again, you use very basic concepts like store, safe, in the menu system. But we've got to cover our ass and constantly remind you of what that probably means from a contextual sense. Now, mind you, I think last time I went and immediately bought this, because frankly it seems to serve no purpose not to. You might as well. You've got the credits. The game seems to sort of, it kind of throws it in your face, so why not? This is something I always like in a game. When you start to progress, you buy new upgrades, you buy new suits, you buy new this, and oh look, you know, oh look, the weapon looks cooler, or in this case, oh look, Isaac looks kind of cooler now. He looks a little more, little less, you know, utilitarian. You know, oh look, I'm sort of like a sewer gutter worker, and more like, hey, actually this guy looks like an engineer, sort of. We're gonna buy that. I guess we're also going to buy. I guess we'll buy the line gun. My other on my other file, save folder, or save file, I actually did not buy the line gun. I bought the pulse rifle. Yes, we know. I know. I feel like there's probably a way to turn that off. I don't know for sure, but there probably is. Okay, so here's that. I'm assuming that's a trap. I'm not entirely sure how that works. Or what you're supposed to do with that. We're probably going to be, admittedly, sticking with the plasma cutter more often than not. Because, to be honest, everything else kind of sucks by comparison. Everything, this one has, I think, in many respects, it's got some of the best upgrade paths you can get. More ammo for this, capacity goes up, damage goes up considerably, reload speed is extremely fast, so you're never really left wanting in that sense. So yeah, so that, there we go. First chapter of Dead Space. I know, again, it sounds like I hate this game. I really don't. I do enjoy it. I do like the game. But I don't know, like, I don't know. It's one of those weird things where I'm like, I don't know. It's immersive in some ways. It's good in some ways. It's terrible in other ways. It's really good in other ways. It's like, I don't know, judging by what I've gone through so far, and again, I'm about halfway through the game in my other save file. Technically, I'd probably give it a 7 so far. Like, it's not a bad game. It's a 7.
You would come, just like you said. I saved this for you. Go.
Use kinesis to move or throw objects.
To take me. Just shut up.
Okay. So 2 things. One, obviously, we just got a new item. Don't even remember what it's called. Basically, gravity gun. Allows me to pick stuff up and throw it and drop it and whatnot. Really cool mechanic. You can technically use it on enemies too. You can pick up bodies, throw them around. Mind you, you can do this indefinitely. This actually reminds me of PsyOps, as a matter of fact. If anybody remembers that, that old chestnut, which I believe is a Midway game, which no longer exists, unfortunately. But yeah, so you can pick up anything. Bodies, limbs, boxes, explosive barrels, because every third-person shooter has red-colored explosive barrels. What a trope, right? Body bags, even, so you can have a little bit of a Richard Crenna moment, Better bring a lot of body bags. Say, First Blood. First Blood reference, in case anybody misses that. Amazing. I bet majority of people I talk to, if I just were to poll a random survey, nobody would know who Richard Crenna was. Couldn't even begin to mention the fact he was the army officer guy in Rambo's handler in First Blood. Anyway, so yeah, we got the Kinect sensor. The kinesis sensor, I don't even know what they call it. The thing that lets me do Half-Life 2, gravity gun stuff. Ooh, that's kind of gross. Look at the maggots. Ooh. That's really gross. Just some neat details. Kind of an easy trick too. I don't even think that's actually a physical object. If I'm not mistaken, those are just 2D textures that are animated at a slower frame rate than the rest of the game. Gives it that sort of weird stick-out effect. Very, very common. You'll see that a lot in modern games. A lot of times, a very easy, low resource not very resource intensive, very easy way to just sort of trick out an interesting effect. But also too, I mentioned you can use this Kinect stuff on limbs. As a matter of fact, the enemies, you'll notice a lot of their limbs are bladed. They have weaponry on them. Yeah, you can totally pick them up and throw them at enemies for that very purpose as well. At this point, I finished the first chapter, and I am hungry. Actually, I am starving to death. So I would actually very, 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 very much like to get something to eat. So I'm going to do that. It is, what time is it? It is 3:51. I've got to make just a brisk little walk to grab food. and some drink as well, because I need some soda, and then from there I will return. Hopefully we will get directly back into chapter 2, because this is a part of the game where a lot of people, I mean, first chapter obviously very introductory, you know, it's very tutorial heavy. This one not quite as bad. It mostly kind of leaves you to your own devices in many respects. Still funnels you to hell and back though, but not in a way that's necessarily depressing. It kind of does have a decent explanation as to why it would be this way. But anyway, on that note, I'm gonna go eat, and I shall return shortly. So thank you for viewing. If you've been viewing, I will be back.